When most people hear the word hell, they picture a place of fire, punishment, eternal torment. But what if this idea is not found in the earliest biblical text at all? What if it's a connecting point between Western understanding and mistranslation? We're going to look at Judaism, Christianity, and even some Gnostic texts to get into the afterlife and to determine what they had in their minds when the idea of hell showed up. So we're going to have to go backwards, way back. And we're going to uncover, or at least try to, the origins of hell. All right. Thank you guys. Sorry I'm behind. I understand. Maybe if you've watched this for a minute, my voice is James Earl Jones right now. And the last couple of days I've been kind of sick. For example, I was in the bathtub for like 3 hours this morning. That's well now, see, the whole point. I'm going to be vulnerable. I take baths. Okay? Did I have bath salts? Yes, I did. Did I use special oils and treatments for sleepy nighttime? Yes, I did. Was it lavender? Absolutely. So I just wanted to apologize. I know I'm behind by a day, but good lesson. I need to have some on backlog. So you'll hear probably this James Earl Jones sick chase voice for a while. Or at least they'll just be put away. That way we don't get behind on schedule. Because I'm already a day behind and I'm like, I don't want to let you guys down. And, this is one that I've really had to hit in the beginning. And, a popular thing is like, deconstructing this and that so you don't have to be that. And I'm like, I just wanted to understand certain aspects of what I was taught as a small kid. And this was a big one for me. And so I thought it'd be fun if we kind of went through these 3 sections of like, they all intersect, right? If it's Judaism, it's the Old Testament. If it's, Gnostic thought, it's the interplay between, maybe some spiritual understanding and then, current canonical gospel accounts. And then we can kind of work through what maybe that looked like in the ancient world, between 0 and 100, 110 AD. So let's do it, huh? Let's do it. So key points. We're going to go through like what hell actually means in the Bible and their translations and where there's some issues. We're going to go through the different words for those like Sheol, Hades, Gehenna. I guess it's Gehenna with a J instead of a G. And then look and see how that changed in this Second Temple Judaism kind of realm. Then get into early Christians, Gnostic afterlife, and then how the West, our understanding of, hell kind of got in the way and where that branch starts. And going through it, this was super fun for me too. And I'm like, man, this is one of those that I have to do. Even if I'm sick, I'll just have fun. So again, sorry for the James Earl Jones voice and maybe a couple coughs here and there, but I'm going to give it back to you guys. So let's rock and roll. So my first section and my first question, which I think is important if you want to kind of dive into some of these too personally for yourself, is like, don't think of it as this big, complex idea or this big, not incomprehensible, ununderstandable thing. Break it down to questions that you have and then work from there, right? So like each one of these sections is a question that I had. And the first one is like, what is hell to all these people? And, as I start walking through, I'm like, oh, that's very different. That's very different than what I'm taught. Or maybe if you're at, an evangelical type, end of the world church, then it's very, very different. But Judaism itself, because I remember watching The Big Bang Theory and Judaism, Howard on the show is Jewish, and he goes, Jews don't have hell. At the time I'm watching that, I'm like, they don't? Like, I remember having that in my head, like, wait, hold on, they don't? And so hell to them was this temporary purification process. It's not like eternal damnation. It's just like a place where you go there for like a year, and then, it's kind of punishment, but it's only temporary, and then the soul can move on after, and you kind of fix whatever you have to. And so that word is Sheol, and that gets translated into what you get in like the New Testament as Gehenna, or Gehenna, I think is what it is, because the temporary place of purification is like more of their Sheol's like a psychological like anguish for the wicked. And so it's just not really associated, I guess the main point is with this eternal idea of damnation and punishment, and for all of eternity you're screwed. And so again, the duration is usually 12 months. And then the moving on period would be, again, I don't speak Hebrew, but olam, it looks like olam haba, right, which refers to the world to come. And so this is, a perfected world after the Messianic age. And it's very physical to them. So it's a physical resurrection, which is very different. Because something I was having to like go back and forth with personally is, okay, if Christianity uses the Jewish Old Testament, how come the Jews as the chosen people don't recognize this? And this is one of those key points where, because to them it was a perfected world itself, the earth, in this Messianic age, through a real like bloodline Messianic figure. And in going through this physical resurrection, this perfected world, I guess you call it the mechanism, I suppose, but this mechanism of punishment, right, is kind of poetically, like, oh, that's really beautiful, is described as the shame and disgrace of like you reviewing one's life and the missed opportunities to serve God in that area. Like, you are looking at yourself unobjectively, and then you're recognizing that as these missed opportunities. And so, again, this eternal damnation is generally rejected by the Jewish idea, except for like, and I found this interesting, it says, except for those who are really bad, like utterly evil. And then I go, let me dive deeper. And the one that was common is, of course, hello, it's Himmler and Hitler. So unless you're super bad, then it's like, okay, yeah, you're not going to be able to do that 12-month. But there wasn't really a definition that I could find for that. And so then we get into the birth of this Christianity narrative where, it is the opposite. It is this eternal separation. And then it's those who haven't accepted the message, and then so no salvation. And right there, it should be pretty clear that's different. But what I didn't know is that based on all these writings and things that we have now, the concept of hell has varied. Like, it's just variable. Like, there are a lot of things that are kind of like, that kind of makes sense, but also that's very different than the hell that it is. And a good comparison, too, is like, there's, Apocalypse of John, which would be like Revelation, but there's also the Apocalypse of Peter. And the only difference between those two is like graphic detail. I remember reading the Apocalypse of like Revelation as a kid and going, I don't really get what's going on. This one, the other Apocalypse of Peter, it's pretty clear what's going on. It's like, you did this crime means forever you're going to be like, dipped in tar upside down and over and over and over. So it's very, very graphic. And I'm like, wow, even for me as an adult, that's hard to wrestle with. The dominant view, other than these varied messages, is that like, it's definitive, eternal separation from God and for those who reject salvation. And so that's usually where you get the word everlasting, right? This everlasting, eternal separation. Now, the mechanism, I guess you would call for, Christian thought is that this fiery imagery is just allegorical. And yet, that's not what I got as a kid. It was like, this is exactly what it is. Yet, the actual early Christian groups were all like, this is allegorical, but also ties into like early Jewish thought because, Sheol and eventually into the Septuagint, which we'll get into, becomes this fiery imagery is often seen as like, oh, well, you get farther away from, the story and then it becomes more real. But again, the core punishment is this complete emptiness and, like frustration because of this eternal separation from God. So that's still the core like message here. But everyone always gets this fiery imagery thing that is just allegorical. And then, there are different ones where, like, I put this one, which I thought was cool, because, like, there are certain denominations that hold different beliefs. And the closest thing I could find is conditional immorality, where the wicked are ultimately just annihilated rather than eternally tormented. So you, as a soul being, it's just obliterated. You're gone. And so, that kind of gets closer to that Jewish thought where if you're really bad, then you're just annihilated. You're gone. And so when we get to Gnosticism and some of these other like concepts of like what hell is as a state, they get into more of like it's an entrapment within this world itself. The material world is hell. And then you're trapped in it, right? So I guess kind of, but it's more of like a metaphor for this flawed material world itself, which is this Gnostic thought of this is hell, this is the prison, right? So it's kind of this metaphorical framework. And the hellish state that we're in the material world is dependent on us interacting in it, right? So we can make it hell if we want to, but we can also like step outside of it. We can learn enough to not fall to this trap or that trap, right? There's like various things we can do to like get knowledge to not have to fall into these concepts of staying in this hellish state. And so it ends when the soul escapes this material world, and eventually through gnosis you get this return to the divine, to the spiritual realm, to God himself, which I think is interesting because that is still like, it's still a Gnostic idea specifically that gets taken by, at least in my eyes, it seems like it gets taken from these early texts of Gnostic thought and then incorporated into some of the other writings you get in, Christian development, theological development early on in the church. And so, the soul itself is then trapped here by ignorance and by darkness, and then understanding that it's an illusion almost, right? And then you get the, creator God, the demiurge, that is the false creator. And so if you get outside of that, then you can get back to the real, the one, right? The thing, the ultimate good that there is. And so again, that's their salvation would be through knowledge. And so I think maybe it gets a little conflated too with that, because when people hear that, they're like, oh, so you're just like a know-it-all smarty pants. It's like, no. The knowledge that you're supposed to get is an understanding of like a true spiritual reality to creation, to the cosmos, to everything itself. And when you do that, then you can find a way to escape, or learn a way to escape, I guess. And so again, that idea gets taken and then people run with it like crazy. But like that message is still pretty important to me, at least, because that's kind of what we're all doing here right now, like learning something new to get closer to the spirit, or as true of a spiritual reality as we can. And I just thought that idea is really, really cool. And so the next question I had is then, what are the words used to translate hell in the Bible, right? And then what do they mean, and are they accurate? And by accurate, I was like, is it just generalized, or is it specific? Do they use these words and translate them accordingly? And so, again, the Hebrew and then the Greek Bibles here use 4 words, right? You have Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, and Tartarus. And so in older Bibles, they were just translated as hell. But if you go to like, I didn't know about this one either, but the New American Bible Revised Edition, NABRE, they don't use the word hell at all. They use those words. And so they kind of used to just round off. I mean, I guess, because I still find them in there. Like even the one I have upstairs, it still uses hell or some of the imagery of hell. But I want to go through the definitions exactly about these words. So Sheol is the Hebrew word, which is a common grave or pit. And so Sheol is mentioned 65, maybe 66 times in the Old Testament, right? So sometimes it's translated as hell, sometimes it's grave, sometimes it's pit. But Sheol just refers to the underworld, the abode of the dead, or, the grave. And then the concept developed over time in biblical text to mean something else, or to get translated down into hell, if you will. But from just doing some preliminary research on the word Sheol, it seems to be underworld, grave, and like a place of the dead. Hades, which is fun if you like Hercules and the Disney movie, or any Greek thought, but that it's also the word for just underworld. And so, that appears 10 times in the New Testament. And it's just often translated as hell. And again, maybe these aren't exact words. I just kind of did a general, like, what's popular versions? How many times did it get translated to hell? And so I think this is important too. The other word is Gehenna, which is different from Hades. So they're different words, but they end up getting rounded off as just translated to hell to make it easy. So those are two separate things. So Hades, again, is just the underworld, right? Like if you go to Greek thought, it's, you're just a shade of yourself almost, and you're just hanging out, walking around, and that's where we're all just going to be. So it's not super specific, which I thought was kind of neat. And so the Old Testament equivalent to Hades is Sheol, but it's not the same term. And so it's just this temporary abode of the dead. And then the torment, again, as we discussed, if they're, they're different words, but they kind of have a relative, meaning to it. It's just the state of like death. And so that could be kind of like torturous, like it's tormenting you because you're dead. And so when you get to Gehenna, the Greek word for the valley of Hinnom, right, which is a real place, which I thought was cool, but it's a garbage dump. It's just a garbage dump outside Jerusalem, and it was associated with fire and death. So that's where you get kind of this like torment, fire, visual imagery, because it literally was a garbage dump. But the Valley of Hinnom, it says 13 times in the Old Testament, and then the term Gehenna, which is Greek from Gehenom, or which is Hebrew. Let me do that again. The term Gehenna is the Greek form of the Hebrew word Gehenom, which is Valley of Hinnom. And so that appears 12 times. And so this is identified with like the modern valley that runs along the like southern western edge of Jerusalem's old city. And so what I could find, it says it merges with the Kidron Valley on the southeast corner of the old city. And so again, remember in Jewish thought, everything is very material. It's not like a spiritual resurrection. It's like a physical messianic age of excellence. And so this makes sense if you're looking at an Old Testament view of, what does this new world look like? And I thought it was cool that we could tie those together in doing this research. When I started going back, it's like, how did this valley get identified with some of these things, and why is it so bad, and how did it develop down, right? So some little biblical history from that is that I found it was a tribal boundary, which I thought was cool, between the tribes of Judah and the tribes of Benjamin. And so the valley gained this negative reputation because of like pagan practices. And then again, it's usually associated with like the sacrifice of children to the god Molech, right? And so to purify it, he prevented, King Josiah defiled this area, and then he ended these practices to prevent any future, disaster, terrible practice, religious practices. So then after the exile of the Jewish people, it became a place to burn the city's garbage and their sewage. So, smells delightful. And then, so sometimes you get a reference to like Valley of the Sewer, right? But again, I think it's just funny that it is a physical place of just stinky, like burning garbage. And then, Gehenna is that Greek word that you get in the New Testament for this, valley. And because of the association with the fire and garbage, boom, you get like a synonym for hell almost. And so the fiery judgment and all that stuff just comes from these. But the metaphor is still referenced as like the final punishment for the wicked when Jesus is quoted using the word Gehenna. And so the unquenchable fire and the unending worm, right? Those are associated with this valley. And so that's when it becomes the representation for this judgment and torment. And so I know we're getting deep in the weeds, but I think it's important if you want to understand where these things developed, you have to go back and then move through time, right? So what I did find is that Gehenna is the exact same kind of idea as Sheol, right? The state of intense shame and then suffering of one's misdeeds. But it's purification, right? So it's just this temporary state, not a permanent one. Also, I don't know if this is accurate, but like that does sound kind of like, know yourself and know yourself truly, because then you get to have this form of like spiritual purification. And so, you get Gehenna in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then you get in the Epistle of James. So the total usage for this, let's see, I'm going to go through here. Yeah, Jesus uses the term 11 times, but it refers to the place of punishment. And then, of course, I said the Epistle of James uses it once. But I want to be clear that Gehenna is exclusively a New Testament term. It's a Greek term in the New Testament. So the Valley of Hinnom is the one in the Old Testament. So they're separate. So the last one, which is really simple, and I saved it because it's short. So Tartarus is used in 2 Peter 2:4. And so this is very different from all the other ones, which I thought was kind of neat, because it's just a deep abyss, right? And it's a temporary imprisonment for fallen angels, which I thought was kind of neat. Like, what? Like, I just assumed Tartarus and Hades were the same place. And then I started digging deeper, and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And it's only used once, which is, I wonder if we can sometime in the future track that idea. But it's the description of like a state or place, I guess, where angels who sin are held in chains of darkness for judgment. And so some render it as hell, just like I thought it was. But it's not the same as this final destination for the wicked, but it's just specifically to fallen angels. And so, like, if anything, if you want to say, like, oh, the place where the demons and Satan live, it's that one. And by that one, it's only used once and not by Jesus. So I was like, whoa, that's a cool kind of interplay on Tartarus versus the New Testament term Gehenna. And so in diving in, I kind of had the next question for me was like, how did this general word for like hell get used for different words that have different symbolic meanings or metaphorical meanings? And so to be completely accurate, textually accurate, we were just lacking English equivalent for the distinct concepts. So we just like kind of put it into this little category. So we took these deep things, and that's common with language too. Like certain things in another language have no equivalent in, English, or like, it's just keep that in mind too. But like, we just didn't have these distinct words and concepts, and so we just put it into one category. And so that's a big no-no in my book already. But, what I could find from modern translations is they're trying to fix it. They're trying to fix that, right? So as we develop this understanding, well, then you get greater accuracy by translating them to, the specific term for the word, rather than just like going hell, right? So instead, like, Sheol would be grave pit, realm of dead, right? And it would have the imagery of like, torment and whatnot. And then of course the other ones more directly, Hades, Gehenna, Tartarus. And so the other question was, okay, the time period for me, I go, how did the Greeks, because, the New Testament's in Greek, so Gnosticism, like Greek thought, Platonism, all this plays into it. So I had to go, all right, how deep do we go? And I said, well, what do the Greeks believe? And so, I'll try to keep this one concise because I went real deep in this, but in archaic Greek, so 650 to 480 BCE, right? Hades is the underworld god that's the personification of death. And so where he lives is divided from the living, by the big, terrible river, the river of like forgetfulness, and you forget who you are. So when I say like you're a shell of that person, right? You're you. And there's lots of cool text in Greek that I've kind of like gotten to go through with my history class in college, where I just made a note that it resembles this Mesopotamian, land of the dead as well. So this idea is building and growing through time. But like, it's dark, cold, joyless, right? Locked gates. You have Cerberus. I never get that right, ever. The hellhound that's guarding the gates, and so, you're sunk into this like witless oblivion, incapable of like communicating, ironically, until some ritual that involves like drinking libations, usually associated with like ram's blood. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So if you are, and this was something in history class where you have to take the body of the dead into account. So if it's an untimely death, or you're improperly buried in Greek thought, you suffer more than common shades of people who just like die naturally. And so if you're really bad, again, you are tormented for those crimes. Kind of that same idea we've been working with here. But just in general, like the Hades that you get in the, like anything related to, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Homeric idea, it's just indifferently unpleasant. So like, life is better than this shade that you get to be. And so then you get to like the classical period, 500 to 323, and then the Hellenistic period of 323 to 30 BCE. And so from those periods to the Roman Empire, right, there's different pockets of Mediterranean society play with this, the teachings in this underworld scenario. And then as they kind of play with it, you get this like infernal, hellish dimension, right, that you start exploring it. And then you get like the exploitation of like moral implications, right? So that's where kind of during this period you kind of grow this idea, and where it becomes like an infernal, like hell type idea. And so we learned about Plato and Cicero in class. And so Plato developed the nuanced idea, or the view of like this temporary, I guess it would be purifying, this temporary purifying hell as a part of a larger system of judgment. And that's based on your life and values that you had. And so the Greek like mythological underworld, right, is this overarching realm of souls after death, right? But then they have different sections, right? So like you get these things breaking down right? So you get the Elysian fields, and you get like Tartarus for the wicked, which I thought was interesting because I thought it was just used for a placeholder for sinful angels. So they do have this Tartarus, but it's just for the wicked. And then, sorry guys, I know there's gonna be lots of cuts in this, but bear with me. I'm just coughing all over the place. And then just for most others, there's just this neutral looks like asphodel meadows. And so you have essentially this breakdown in the underworld of like, the fields for the heroes, the Tartarus realm of, punitive, blah, blah, blah for the wicked. And then you have the asphodel models for everybody else. And so, it's usually involved heroes for the Elysian fields, but I did put that it also is people who lived an honorable life. So it is based on this life, virtue, values, moral judgment system. So the regular meadows, the asphodel meadows, which is where the majority of people go, it doesn't have any indication of good or bad. It's just like a general neutral area. And to me, it always reminded me of this like idea of Sheol in Hebrew. And, all I got was it's this somber, aimless existence. So you're just like a shade of yourself. And so those are those breakdowns that you get. And so this Platonic thinking, the soul's journey and purification, so this dualistic reality of forms or ideas becomes Plato's like, I almost said Plato's playground. But the idea comes from this physical world being like a shadow. And so that shadow is of a higher perfect world of these forms and ideas. And so the judgment after death that I could find, if it came to Platonic thinking, was he introduces the idea of the soul being judged after death. But that's by, the virtues, and it's the good or bad. It's the thing we get from, in Christianity, where it's salvation or eternal damnation, right? It comes from Plato doing this virtuous life. So you're either rewarded or, punished by being virtuous or wicked, right? You get these two dualistic realities. But the thing that gets messed up is that, okay, let's say that is true. It was only temporary. So you don't get the eternal torment from the later Christian hell, right? Until much later. And so Plato was saying that this is temporary so you can become virtuous. I'm almost coughed again. But it served as a place for souls to be purified through suffering. So this suffering and then their misdeeds, they could move on to a better afterlife, or like be reborn almost. And so it's not like you messed up the one time you can do this. It's like you're going to suffer for these things, but it also will get you to the point of being virtuous. And so a mention of that was the myth of and the Republic. So in Plato's myth of and the Republic, it describes the soul choosing their next life up to their time in the afterlife. So go through the process, punishment, reward, leading to a cyclical journey of the soul. And so kind of one of these like, okay, well, if all that's true and there are elements of it that are true, I go, does this mean there's a single unified idea of hell in Christianity? And so I wanted to make sure I got a good consensus on like a scholarship idea of what this is. And while the answer is no, as we can see now, like there's no unified idea that we all can go like, oh, blah, 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 this is exactly what it means, because of the misrepresentation, the difference in the original words, and then combining it into just hell, you get it all diluted into just a general category. So the answer is no. But, where it's divided is that, some see the original terms as referring to these concepts, right? The grave, the spiritual realm, place of fiery judgment. But then you have others that are saying, no, this is the modern concept of like eternal conscious torment that we get now. And so it's just split. Let's just keep it that way. I don't want to go, I'll scroll through those notes, but there were three main contemporary views in scholarship I found, right? And so you have they call it the eternal conscious torment, which is the like traditionalism, I guess you would call, but it's the widely held Christian view, especially in like Western Christianity. It posits the unsaved will suffer consciously and eternally in a place, literally or metaphorically, of punishment and separation from God. So that's your traditionalism. Then you have the annihilationism we talked about earlier, or the conditional immortality, which is that human souls are not inherently immortal, and so the wicked will face judgment. And in that judgment, they'll be completely destroyed or cease to exist after a period of this conscious punishment. And so, the result is absolute destruction or annihilationism. And so not this punishment of unending torment. So you just get wiped out. You're just done. Like this soul is not good, right? We're just going to destroy it completely. And so the other one I found that I didn't know about is this universal reconciliation or Christian universalism. And so the position on this one is that the redemptive love ultimately will triumph of God, but all will eventually be reconciled and saved. So there's no annihilation, right? And also every soul, even the bad ones, also get, saved because the love is so deep. And you kind of get that, but it's more of like the fear factor. It's more of like the fear factor of hell that is the traditional Western view. And so in this view of the universalism, right, any post-mortem death or punishment is just temporary, kind of purgatory, and then not eternal, final state of like death. So I was like, oh, cool. I kind of meshed all these three together to get what I learned as a child. Sorry, I thought I heard my kiddo. I think he's awake now. And so the thing I wanted to go through, let's see. So those three key ideas of, what does the afterlife look like? I go, is there any influence, another question, any influence on early Christian ideas of hell that come from, things related to Judaism? So is it like Jewish apocalypticism or, the Greek idea of the underworld? And something that I found going deep into these is like, absolutely they do. So if you're going to Judaism, right, this apocalyptic message, this Jewish apocalypticism it contributes to the ideas of a future judgment, and there's a place for that judgment. And so that gets combined with this existing Greco-Roman idea of, a gloomy underworld of the dead. And so after those things kind of come together, it later evolves into this dualistic system, with the addition of like, the place for heroes and Tartarus for the wicked. So the Elysian fields and, so I've heard it Elysium sometimes, but Tartarus for the wicked, Elysium for heroes. So you get this idea, and then you get people interjecting into that idea with this Jewish apocalyptic message. And so Virgil's Aeneid, which I thought was cool, adds to the development of these separate, regions of the afterlife. And so in that you also get specific sins or specific things you did. They have specific punishment. So it doesn't come from, let's say, biblical accurate text. It comes from people adding in these vivid underworld, like, separate regions. And why? And I just thought it was really cool that Virgil is the one that I keep finding that has the specific punishment for the specific thing you did, right? And so, think of the time period, right? So the biblical connection would be like, these are all existing cultural understandings of what the afterlife looks like. And, clearly super influenced by, Hellenistic thought in periods of time where they combine these cultural ideas. And so the things that I wanted to look at, again, we established the time period was 0 to 110, right? So the things I found that I just put real briefly were like, what do they share and what is developing at this time? And so what you get is a dual destination, right? Some viewed it as like a place for everybody, but then also you get the idea of like a separate place and punishment for wicked, and that started to gain prominence during this time. So after that, you also get this judgment. So the judgment after death, which is this post-mortem judgment and punishment, that kind of gets to take shape almost, right? So it's influenced by both this Jewish apocalypticism and other Jewish traditions merging with new Platonic and Greek philosophical thinking, right? They start to merge. And so another concept was like torture almost, or like this torment. And again, we talked about, Apocalypse of Peter at this time beginning to provide some of those detailed punishments, specific ones. And so, it's still in the early stages and it's not specific. So it's still developing, but it's the idea of specific punishments for specific things you did wrong. And so, in my mind, I go, well, how the hell then do we get from all... Yeah, how the hell did we get hell? Yeah. But anyway, so I just wanted to kind of bridge those and see if I could find something. And the last question I had was then how do we get this modern Western view of hell? And so, it might be misinterpretation, but generally speaking, it's a combination of theological developments by the church fathers coming up with the integration of this Greek philosophical concept. So you get these concepts, you get these church fathers who are doing it, and then also it becomes a very useful social control system to where if you can get specific on what you did, then this is where you're going to be, right? That is definitely a control system because it's not in there. It's not developed yet, right? So how do you develop it? Well, you craft it into this control system. So you get this Platonic idea of the soul is inherently immortal. And then, people like Tertullian or Augustine, right? They kind of take this concept into Christian, doctrine and then kind of messes with it, post-mortem punishment. So they use it to like kind of build that control system we're talking about. So then, the annihilationism doesn't have a play in this period of time with Tertullian and Augustine, because if the soul cannot die or be destroyed based on Platonic thought, then, any punishment in the afterlife must necessarily be like an eternal conscious suffering because you're still being punished. So you can kind of see how I'm working through this, right? Like it's confusing to me as well. So you're making assumptions and you're adding things in because this idea says this, so it can't be this, and so this must be that, and you get kind of lost in the weeds of all this. But, again, that doesn't really hold up to anything earlier. So if it's earlier Jewish, understanding, and then, we already kind of went through some early Christian ideas, right, that like the wicked would, perish or be destroyed, right? That's that annihilationism. That doesn't really mesh with what we have now. But, sorry, I feel like I'm going to cough again. So if these are being developed, I had to know who was developing those ideas. So, who are the key theologians at this time doing this work? It'd be St. Augustine, right? So like 350 to 430 CE, really cemented this eternal torment as part of the Orthodox position in at least the Western understanding of Christianity. And so, vigorously went through, eternal punishment. He countered other views, including the popular one of universalism, which I thought was cool, that's the one that's... So in the early church, universalism is the one that was top dog. They're like, no, that's definitely understandable. And so, a book that we're going to read, at least I am in my class, is City of God by Augustine. And it became this book of it became Western theology. It became the thing that we understand it as. And so this idea, so this is where the scholarship kind of gets that weird conflicted viewpoint, is because it also includes this new idea of original sin, right? And eternal punishment. So where you get kind of lost in this, and I kind of go, is that even he includes unbaptized infants as being not saved. And it gets kind of, I don't want to go down that path, but anyway, just understand that Augustine and City of God, for example, is a work that if you want to kind of go through it, you'll probably get a better idea. And so, of course, the Middle Ages, you get, St. Thomas Aquinas, and then, then said 225 or 1225 to 1274. So that's where you kind of get this reinforcing idea of Augustine's traditional view of the nature of hell, divine justice, and then it backs up Augustine was the one who gave, this viewpoint. And so then we get to the social order, the social control and fear tool. And so if it's, and this is something, if you want to do it yourself, I sat there and I go, what? And I kind of imagined how I would build this tool, but the vivid depictions of this eternal torment, right? It's an emotional tool, right? You ensure compliance, and you keep a relative order in Christian communities by doing these things, by making it so vivid and making it so bad and making it like this. And so just the fear alone of this punishment for all of eternity, this agonizing, never-ending torment, right? It adheres to this church doctrine for a social control where, they have to maintain this cooperation, because then you're building this new church. And so it also limits any free thinking, free writing, or I don't know why I put free writing, sinful behavior, because then you can keep your control system in this box because of the bad stuff. And so I can totally see where that kind of became the back, and just from me, not even any notes that I have, but that was the thing. Even when I was little, I was like, oh no, you have to do this and you have to do that. And again, that could be just because it's, a creedal religion, and it says you have to, so I have to. But I had to go backwards in time to figure out, as I'm going through these things, is that true? And I'm just going through this going, oh man, if I could tell my younger self this when I was a kid, and I could really grasp it, maybe in a simpler version, of course, we're all watching this because we want to learn something as an adult, but if I would have known this and that it's not solid, then it also might have, I feel better about it now, because that was the thing that really hooked me and kept me not doing what I'm doing now, which I love this. This is so fun. I hope you guys are having fun too, because the more we do this, the more that we learn about where human error and human manipulation plays into something that might have a really interesting spiritual background. And so if you can kind of go through those things, you're pulling out human interaction from something that might be divinely inspired. So I need to separate those, because if you just round off and say that that's not that, right? No, it's completely inerrant. Well, then you're missing the point, right? There's some data in there. There's something buried in there that made this thing what it is. But if it's too hard or you refuse to do it, then you're going to miss the point of it because you're just seeing human manipulation. So when you get far down the line, then you're reading something that you think is spiritually enlightened, but it's just someone else writing a theological point of view that then gets blended into the text. And that's very dangerous. At least in my eyes, it's very dangerous, especially if you have a very good control system and you maintain order this way. So something else that kind of develops this idea, and I only know this from playing the video game, but Dante's Inferno, which is the 14th century, kind of gave backbone to all these, like, it kind of brought into focus this structured, torturous, eternal hell that's sharp, it's vivid, and you can walk through it almost, but it's an imaginative work that's like a pop culture reference, right? So that also leads to these literal depictions of what it is based on, reinforcing theological views and teachings of this eternal torment with this creative, imaginative work to get this blend of Western Christian, like, imagination. And like I said before, there were some champions for the view that was popular, which is universalism. And so someone that I really like, two people that I really like, I'm reading them right now, is Clement of Alexandria. And then the next one, because he's just, a theological genius in this case, is like Origen. So their idea was universalism, where everyone gets to, through the love of God, gets to have salvation. And so annihilationism, like, was around, but like the one that was really popular is this universalism. And so, if you combine the weight of Augustine's authority at the time, this Greek philosophical influence, and then practical utility of fear and control, and you make it eternal, and you make it a conscious, you're aware of it, and you can never have this, and it's just awful, right? That kind of gives you this traditional view in the Western world of what hell is. And so I hope that by walking through this, and maybe we'll go down a path of, like, what's universalism, what's annihilationism, what time periods, right? Like, by doing this one study about what exactly the Western idea of hell is and where it comes from, we get a bunch of these ideas that come out of it that we can go through individually. And I love that. I think that, one, that's what I would do. I'd love to do that, and I'd love to do it with you guys. So there are, certain verses that I just have, that's really the main goal here. And maybe I won't go into some of these yet, but, like, I'll bring them up. But the ones that are popular that describe hell, that mention, like, fire, for example, you have Mark 9:43 to 48, Matthew 25:41, that's the eternal fire. There's a reference in Matthew 25:30 to the outer darkness and the weeping and gnashing of teeth. Of course, you have Book of Revelation's imagery of the lake of fire, sulfur, right? So Revelation 20:14 to 15. And so most of these are like, oh, wow, there are conflicting views of, like, is it, a literal description? Is it like a liberal interpretation, if you will, metaphorical warning of your consequences for this behavior? But again, the dating of these, like, various ideas are in that same time period of, like, 0 to, 110. And so I just thought that some of those were good. I'll probably just include these other notes, if I can, in maybe some type of a PDF and put it in the description. Because some of them I found some good notes and some good details. And so, like, yeah, I think I'll just do that. So there are certain things that I found, which we'll go into this one in another video too, but to kind of conclude here, most of these accounts, again, they're in Greek. And so the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Like they want to understand, so they work with, I forget exactly the process, so I have the notes building for the Septuagint, but there are certain ways that the Septuagint is very, very different, or at least maybe we don't have a word for that, so we'll put it this way. And the gospel accounts, by using the Septuagint, get an idea that might not be the idea from, the Hebrew Bible itself. And so that's also kind of cool, because it means that we can, if it's verbatim the Septuagint, but that Septuagint verse is different from the Hebrew Bible, well, right? So it means it's probably written by people who have an understanding of these Greek philosophical ideas that build upon these ideas of hell or the afterlife or areas of the afterlife. And so, again, their numbers are varied, but at the high end, it's like 10% of the world at this time is educated, right? And that doesn't mean like, oh, you can read, like, I'm reading my notes. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We mean like you might be literate enough to write your name or sign some documents or read some basic preliminary Greek to know what you're signing for, I guess. But, some of them are even lower. So it's a specific type of, educated individuals who can now build upon these philosophical traditions and ideas. And so, I'll just break it down with Mark 9:43-48. The word used is Gehenna, or Gehenna. I keep doing the G. Then you have Matthew 25:41, right? Which is, let's see, I thought this was interesting too. The word here, right? Let's see, Bible Gateway note, Oh, I didn't put it. Gosh darn it. Anyway, so either way, Matthew 25:41. God, I'm kicking myself in the butt for not putting the word. But the fire it says in here that the fire prepared for the devil and his angels, that comes from 1st Enoch, which I think is cool. So 1st Enoch 10:13 says the evil angels and the Semiaza, their leader, in those days will lead them into the bottom of the fire and in torment in the prison where they will be locked up forever. So I thought that it's cool that there's a reference to a book that's not in canon, but they know it, and they include it and add it to Matthew in this case. Very important. And so, Luke 16:19, right? Netherworld, right, would be Hades, right? Refers to the realm of the dead, not the final hell or eternal punishment. And so that's interesting, as well as Hades being used in Revelation 20:14-15, right? So, and I thought it was cool that also in Revelation, in that verse 14, it describes the lake of fire as the second death, but also it has this personification of death. So it says, then death and Hades were thrown into the pool of fire. And you go, whoa, very cool. Tell me that's not a Greek idea. And so other cool things I found was like, there's references to, different groups in that text. And I'll put the links down below because I thought it was really interesting. So there's even a town called Pergamum and a group called Nicolaitans, I think. But anyway, I just thought that we would kind of round off with that. And then Matthew 10:27-28 also has this idea of, I thought was cool, because Jesus warns that God has the power to destroy both soul and body in hell. So to me, that sounds like the annihilationism that we were talking about that was around. And then also the same word is, Gehenna. And so you have your different ideas to conclude here with, if you want to do like a scholarship consensus, I guess, it's like, it's either the literal interpretation, right? It's either figurative, right? Or there might be like a a blend, like an intermediate, like this could be true, and then they kind of went with this. So, you know, I guess you can kind of take it how you will, but I just wanted to make it clear that like the idea itself did not just inherently become the text, right? We develop these ideas. We interject into the book what it means. It doesn't mean it specific. We are using it to mean something specific. So I think that's good for all of us, because it means that we have the power. If we can do that together, right? We don't have to like do this rigid structure, because if not, like, I don't want to go to this place. And I go, what is this place? Right? Oh, this place is a coalition, a creation of ideas that merge down into what we later have now. It's not the original idea. In fact, there are multiple different ideas of what it could be. And it goes from all the way to like Old Testament Hebrew, working its way all the way to us. If you follow the path, the ideas grow, they change, they mesh with other like cultures and civilizations and ideas that they ended up being surrounded by. And so as groups, we're creating this idea. And so I just want to bring that up, because it means that by watching this, or, you know, trying to think of a way to change the world, it means that we can, and we've done it. But in order to go, instead of going backwards, we can decide to move forward as a group, as a species, as a human civilization. We have the power to do that. And I think that's really, really powerful in a time where it's kind of chaotic. And so going through this also, one, gives me a peace of mind to know that if someone has something to like try to interject in my family, or change a way that I'm, you know, communicating an idea, you kind of have this like knowledge basis to make a judgment call and go, hold on a minute, I don't think that's accurate. And then, okay, well then it doesn't, to me it gives me a barrier, a little bit of a shield almost. And I just want to make sure you guys have that as well. So again, there's our little walkthrough of like how we got this Western idea of hell. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, do the thing, do everything you need to do, right? I'm going to get back on schedule. I apologize for my voice and for missing the timeline. I'll make sure that you guys don't miss out on anything in the future. Cool? Thanks for watching.